Robbie, what's on your radar?
Well, Nikole Hannah-Jones is a New York Times journalist and architect of the 1619 Project, a Pulitzer Prize-winning series of articles that recontextualizes the central roles that slavery and racism played in America's founding. Those articles are now being taught in some public schools, even though numerous critics of the project have raised questions about very basic factual issues in some of the pieces. Indeed, 5 historians wrote to the New York Times that the 1619 Project gets basic historical facts wrong. They wrote, quote, "We ask that the Times, according to its own high standards of accuracy and truth, issue prominent corrections of all the errors and distortions presented in the 1619 Project. We also ask for the removal of these mistakes from any materials destined for use in schools, as well as in all further publications, including books bearing the name of the New York Times." One notable mistake, for instance, was the idea that defending slavery was a principal cause of the Revolutionary War. A Northwestern University history professor who had fact-checked the article for the Times vigorously objected to that contention. But according to her, the Times ignored her. The errors within the 1619 Project have been well publicized. People who tune into conservative TV, radio, and print are well informed about them, and thus they object to including this flawed work in the curriculum for K through 12. Perhaps it should come as no surprise, then, that Hannah-Jones is uncomfortable leaving curriculum decisions to people who are not district officials and would thus be less inclined to teach her work. Yes, in a Sunday interview on Meet the Press, Hannah-Jones confessed that she did not understand this idea that parents should decide what's being taught. That's a quote.
I don't really understand this idea that parents should decide what's being taught. I'm not a professional educator. I don't have a degree in social studies or science. We send our children to school because we want them to be taught by people who have expertise in the subject area. And that is not my job. When the governor or the candidate said that he didn't think parents should be deciding what's being taught in school, he was panned for that. But that's just the fact. This is why we send our children to school and don't homeschool, because these are the professional educators who have the expertise to teach social studies, to teach history, to teach science, to teach literature. And I think we should leave that to the educators. Yes,
Her statement echoed widely panned comments made by former Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe during the 2021 gubernatorial race against Republican challenger Glenn Youngkin. McAuliffe's statement denying that parents should play a paramount role in the education of their own children is rightly seen as a realigning moment, one that allowed Youngkin to run and win on a platform of making the public education system accountable to families. But Hannah-Jones seems to believe that McAuliffe had it right, even if his comments were unpopular. As it turns out, the idea that parents should broadly surrender their rights to public school officials is both unpopular and, in my opinion, misguided. And yes, it's possible for parents to become too involved in school affairs, no doubt, getting individual books removed from library shelves, for instance. But much of what parents have found objectionable in the past year is truly eyebrow-raising. As I wrote last January in an article I wrote for Reason Magazine titled An Anti-Racist Education for Middle Schoolers, quote, Fairfax Public Schools in Virginia invited Ibram X. Kendi, an activist and author of the books How to Be an Anti-Racist and Anti-Racist Baby, to have a virtual conversation with principals, administrators, and teachers. Kendi, who was paid $20,000 to speak for 1 hour, believes that the Constitution should be amended to create a federal Department of Anti-Racism with the power to censor public officials who make racist statements. The district also bought $24,000 worth of his books, which argue that any arrangement producing unequal results along racial lines is racist by definition. The National Education Association, for instance, wants schools to offer a critique of empire, white supremacy, anti-blackness, racism, patriarchy, cis-heteropatriarchy, capitalism, ableism, anthropocentrism, and other forms of power and oppression at the intersections of our society. That appeared in action item number 39 at the NEA's annual meeting last year. Now, it doesn't matter whether you define this sort of thing as critical race theory, though the NEA certainly does. It matters that activist educators are working to include it. The best solution to the education culture wars is to give parents the best kind of choice, school choice. Instead of engaging in venomous, all-consuming battles over what schools should teach to students, families should be empowered to take their education dollars, find a schooling option that best fits their children. This is a freedom that Nikole Hannah-Jones should enjoy for her kids and that you should enjoy for your kids. During the Meet the Press interview, Hannah-Jones made an attempt at consistency, taking the position that neither she nor other non-educators had the relative expertise to decide what should be taught in public schools. I'm not a professional educator, she said. This is a somewhat confusing claim coming from someone who is currently a tenured professor at Howard University's School of Communications. She is quite literally a professional educator. But it shouldn't matter. Schools are clearly not immune to ideological capture. We have seen this in higher ed, and increasingly we are seeing it in K through 12, where a kind of diversity training model that becomes popular in elite circles, college campuses, even corporate America, is filtering down to our kids in a really perverse and uneducational way. Parents don't need to leave this up to a scarcely accountable education bureaucracy. They have rights too. And I'd be happy to have a conversation with Nikole Hannah-Jones, to have her on the show if she'd like to come on. I don't know if she'd be willing. I'm happy to reach out to her. I don't mean to pick on her. I think the 1619 Project had a lot of merit to it, and there was a lot of interesting new scholarship in it. But it did get some things wrong. This is not just like a conservative attack on this whole project. A lot of mainstream and liberal voices have objected to particularly how they characterize the Revolutionary War. It was not primarily fought to protect slavery. And it is being packaged in a way for some schools, and I don't kind of like this. Well, parents have no right to complain about that because they're not educators, and we're just going to leave all these decisions to a cabal of like totally unaccountable education officials who are increasingly interested in like these trendy diversity kind of things. It's an unpopular idea and a misguided idea, as I said.
Let's unpack the primary cause controversy that she got herself caught up in. So, her claim in her opening essay was that, the primary cause of the Revolutionary War was the preservation of slavery. They have since edited/corrected that line to saying one of the causes, or for some, I think it now says for some leading colonists, a cause was. It is complicated. It wasn't as clear as it was said in that one line. But people should Google up the proclamation in 1775 by Lord Dunmore in Virginia, which said that, if the colonists rebel, I will give freedom to any slaves who come fight for the British side. That was published in all 13 colonies. And when the Revolutionary War did break out, maybe as many as 1 in 4 slaves either escaped behind British lines or signed up and fought with the British, for their freedom. And in New England, and this is where the historians who demanded the correction focused on, in New England, they had lots of different reasons for launching the revolution. There was a lot of economic discontent. The elites there were like, look, don't be mad at us, it's the British. They're trying to tax you and all of these terrible things. So let's separate from Britain, but we stay on top of the economic pyramid. So they had good reasons of their own that had nothing to do with slavery to launch the revolution. So it's true that that's the case. In order to get the entire kind of eastern seaboard of the continent, all of the colonies behind the effort, Lord Dunmore's proclamation and some other moves that the Crown was making at the time, plus the removal of Spanish-controlled Florida out of the equation, enabled the South, the Southern planter class, to then be okay with the revolution. So it wasn't like it was the primary driver, but without the kind of Southern planters' fear that people like Dunmore were going to recruit their slaves and were going to then free them, leading to some type of abolition, then it's unlikely that they would have actually joined with the North. Because we know how well the North and the South get along, and that was no different pre-revolutionary. So she overstated it, but so did the historians who kind of fired back at her. And that's just been like a pet peeve of mine about this entire conversation, that it's actually a lot more complicated than both she and the historians make it out to be. Anyway. And
she uncomplicates it when she says that 1619 is the true founding of the country, and then she'll say, well, I didn't actually mean that it's the true founding of the country, but you literally said that in several different places. There's a kind of carelessness about this whole thing that should not have been, and it's Pulitzer Prize winning.
Part of it is it's so wild that we're still talking about it. It would be fine to me to say, as a thought experiment, what if we thought about the true founding as 1619, and we started to think about the way that slavery has influenced the development of the country the entire time, as a thought experiment, as a way to understand this current situation that we're in now. But because it's the New York Times, because there was this massive reaction, because it got a Pulitzer Prize, then every kind of line in the piece gets elevated, and then once it gets elevated, it just starts getting eviscerated. Because you know, to say that like an idea was founded on any particular date,
Right.
Is always going to be arbitrary. Even if you're picking July 4th or July 2nd or 1789 or 1793, like whatever you want to pick, it's going to be somewhat arbitrary because the week before those ideas were still around.
And I simply do not agree that that the Civil War period, that slavery in America's in the colonial period is not sufficiently covered in K through 12 education. Now there are a lot of ways K through 12 education is deficient. Don't get me wrong, but that is a highly covered period of American history in American history classrooms in high school, even in 7th and 8th grade to some extent. Other aspects of American history end up getting short shrift because you don't get to them by the end. And maybe it can be done in a better way, and there more education always good, whatever. But it is not like the reality of slavery in America is not talked about.
And what's
in
ironic
American
is
that's just not true.
What's ironic is you could probably argue that slavery had more to do with the development of the United States than it did with the founding, in the sense that the institution of slavery in the 1830s and 40s was exponentially more powerful than it was in 1776. 1776, it was about 400,000 enslaved people working, dying fallow and ruined tobacco fields. But then Eli Whitney and the cotton gin, and then you have 4 million enslaved people who are producing this massive boom of wealth that then is the thing that.
Well, and even if you're talking, and the racism aspect of it, the scientific racism, the horrible and pseudo non-scientific ideas that were to back up and defend this indefensible, morally reprehensible practice actually didn't exist in the 1500s, 1600s. They were still developing. It took until the 1800s
for the purpose of it.
Absolutely, yeah. So, anyway, Team Rising will join us next, so stay tuned for that.